Welcome to the plenary session of the 2021 Ad Health Virtual Workshop. My name is Amelia Carricker, and I am the Ad Health Program Official from the Division of Behavioral and Social Research at the National Institute on Aging, which is one of the 27 institutes and centers of the National Institutes of Health. The Ad Health study, we're proud to support, and along with us, NIA, we're joined by co-funders from the following NIH institutes and centers: the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, also known as NICHD, National Institute on Drug Abuse, NIDA, the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities, NIMHD, the Division of Program Coordination, Planning and Strategic Initiatives, the Office of Disease Prevention, and the Office of Behavioral and Social Sciences Research, or OBSSR. I'll leave it to my distinguished panelists to share more of the exciting and innovative aspects of the Ad Health study, but just wanted to touch on a few notable things about this incredible resource. The first is that the study obtains unprecedented environmental, behavioral, psychological, biological, and genetic data from early adolescence into adulthood with extensive racial, ethnic, sociodemographic, socioeconomic, and geographical diversity. Key findings have shown that the Ad Health cohort is at the forefront of the obesity epidemic, which has profound consequences for cardiometabolic health risks, as well as Alzheimer's disease, and significant social genetic, and there's also significant social genetic information on schoolmates and peers on health and behavior. The Ad Health has a large and multidisciplinary user base, of which you are part of it, of over 50,000 researchers around the world who have published over 3,500 research articles. Just to provide a brief piece of housekeeping, please put your questions into the chat and remain muted. And with that, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Robert A. Hummer, the Ad Health Wave 6 Director at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill.
Hi, everybody. I'm just going to get my screen shared here. How's that? Okay. Thank you, Amelia, and thank you for the introduction, and of course for the National Institute on Aging sponsorship of Wave 6, which is much, much appreciated, of course. Thank you to everybody for joining today, to the Ad Health staff and the Carolina Population Center staff who helped put this workshop together today, for my Ad Health colleagues who have worked on the workshop and that we work together every day on this amazing study, and of course for our funders, which I'll mention again at the end of the presentation. Okay, I'm charged with speaking through Ad Health origins today and a little bit of a history and kind of where we're headed. So Ad Health was originally developed in response to a 1993 congressional mandate to fund a study, longitudinal study on adolescent health. The project began in 1994, 27 years ago, with primary funding from NICHD. Ad Health was originally two waves of surveys conducted in the mid-1990s, and then evolved into a multi-wave design in the early 2000s. Originally called the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent Health, Ad Health was renamed the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent to Adult Health in 2014, recognizing, of course, that adolescents don't stay adolescents forever. And then in 2016, Ad Health was fortunate to be awarded the Golden Goose Award by US Congress, which is an award founded in 2012 by a coalition of businesses, university, and scientific organizations. And it highlights examples of seemingly obscure studies that have led to major breakthroughs and resulted in significant societal impact. Okay, a little bit about the Ad Health sampling structure, so that we can I'll get a basic insight into where our Ad Health respondents came from. The AdHealth sampling structure was developed from a list of US high schools compiled by Quality Education Data Incorporated. From that list of all high schools in the United States, 80 were chosen that were representative of US high schools with respect to region of the country, urbanicity, size, type of school, and ethnic mix. Eligible high schools included an 11th grade and enrolled more than 30 students. Participating high schools helped also identify feeder schools, that is, schools that included a 7th grade and sent at least 5 graduates to that high school. So all in all, this recruitment effort results in a pair of schools in each of 80 communities in the United States. Some high schools, which spanned grades 7 through 12, didn't include a separate feeder school. In all then, there are individuals in AdHealth dataset from 132 schools in the study. So obviously it means that the data are clustered, which is a really great feature of AdHealth. Every student in these 132 schools was eligible for the main sample. And about 150 adolescents were drawn from each school pair, right in the middle of the slide, resulting in about 12,000 wave 1 respondents. An additional roughly 8,000 initial respondents were drawn from special oversamples within these same schools. Black students from highly educated families, Chinese, Cuban, and Puerto Rican students, students from 16 saturated high schools, and self-identified disabled students and genetic pairs. So all told then, the data are 20,745 wave 1 respondents, and they represent individuals in American schools in grades 7 through 12 in 1994-95. A very unique, important design feature of AdHealth from the get-go that continues to be the case today is our direct measurement of social contexts, both in adolescence and now in adulthood. In adolescence, this meant peer networks, school contexts, family contexts, and neighborhoods, all embedded within larger cultural and policy environments of counties, states, and regions. Data on all of these levels are available going back to the origins of AdHealth. Given our continued emphasis on the social context that influence health and health behavior, context will continue to be an important part of data collection moving forward. Other innovative features of the initial AdHealth design include the genetic subsample in AdHealth and family structure diversity in wave 1. So on the left side of your screen, you can see that the initial genetic subsample of 3,700 or so of wave 1 respondents means that there's a lot of twins and sibs, half sibs, full sibs, unrelated individuals living in the same household and so forth in the AdHealth data. Again, think about the school design. You've got siblings, in the same schools at the same time. So this is a great initial feature of AdHealth to, for example, be able to look at gene by environment interactions. Family structure diversity on the right side of your screen was also huge in the initial design, where these adolescents at wave 1 were living in all kinds of different family structures during adolescence. There's also substantial, as Amelia mentioned, substantial race and ethnic diversity in wave 1 of AdHealth. This is just one way of measuring race ethnicity. This is based on self-reports from wave 1. We have a lot of data on race ethnicity where researchers can code race ethnicity in different ways. But here you can see, for example, that close to 50% of the original sample was either Latino or Hispanic, Black or African American, or Asian American or Pacific Islander. So again, that facilitates a lot of different kinds of analysis to look at health disparities and other kind of racial ethnic differences. Okay, AdHealth response have, of course, in middle school and high school. And this slide, which is busy, but you'll have access to all the slides in these presentations, shows that the 20,745 adolescents in wave 1, representing American students in grades 7 to 12 in the mid-1990s, have all been followed since, unless they died, expressed that they did not want to be contacted again or have been dropped for a few other minor reasons. The slide shows that AdHealth respondents have long since left adolescence, and they've now moved beyond young adulthood as well. The cohort is moving toward early middle age. In the latest wave, completed wave 5, which Kathy Harris will discuss in greater detail in a few minutes, we switched to a largely web-based questionnaire and ended up with 12,300 respondents. You see that kind of in the middle bottom of the slide here. The age range there in wave 5 was age 33 to 43. As we look to wave 6 and beyond, it is straightforward to see that AdHealth data will cover a greater and greater portion of the life course, which truly makes it one of the nation's most innovative and comprehensive data sets to study health and health disparities at the national level. In all then, in this kind of overview, I summarize that AdHealth is exceptionally unique compared to many other studies of aging and health for at least the following reasons. We have prospectively collected data on socially, economic, and health experiences since adolescence. We've collected biomarker, anthropometric, other biological data, and cognitive data before many adverse health outcomes manifest. We have very rich data from multiple levels of exposure: cellular data, individual survey data, contextual data from many levels, including friends and family, peers, households, neighborhoods, counties, and states. We also include parental data from adolescents and for some parents in older adulthood. Joe Hutz will be talking about the AdHealth parent study in just a few minutes as well, a very innovative addition to AdHealth data from the last few years. AdHealth data also facilitates analysis of health disparities because of its racial and ethnic diversity, socioeconomic distribution, focus on gender identity and sexual orientation, and geographic distribution. Many papers been published on health disparities using AdHealth data, and many will continue to be. And finally, of course, AdHealth is nationally representative, as I've already mentioned. Thus, the data help tell what I call the American story, rather than stories that are limited to one community or one health setting, and so we're not limited in geographic scope. Okay, in terms of the data itself, some of its features. Again, a lot of detail here, but the point being that the survey data contain a very rich set of domains across the waves. As you may imagine, longitudinal data includes many important repeat measures across waves, while also innovating using new measures based on life course stage and new priorities. Given research priorities for wave 5, for example, at the far bottom right of your screen, a battery of items was added on each adult's retrospective recollection of child health and socioeconomic circumstances that taps into dimensions of life prior to their entrance into the cohort during adolescence. At present, not shown on the screen here, but just as you look this over, wave 6 of AdHealth is presenting us with the need for both longitudinal integrity, as well as the huge opportunity, and I would say obligation, to add new content on early middle adulthood in American society and priorities for current research and life in the decades ahead. I'll get to that in just a couple minutes.
You have about 5 minutes left, Bob.
Thanks, Amelia. Okay, examples of contextual and administrative data are also shown on your screen here. As noted, remember in the contextual figure above where the kid was jumping surrounded by the multiple levels of context, AdHealth is not simply an individual level data resource, but also a data resource that contains thousands of contextual variables linked to individuals that also vary across time. So just a sampling of such contextual data is listed on this slide. Importantly, we're always adding more contextual data. We have several studies in process doing this right now, and another application under consideration. This will continue to be a very important emphasis of AdHealth data moving forward. And of course, AdHealth has been on the cutting edge of collecting and making available biological and clinical data for decades now. AdHealth inclusion of the genetic subsample in wave 1 and our latest edition of genetic data has opened doors for many researchers interested in, for example, gene by environment interactions. In wave 4, our collection of blood spots resulted in a large array of biomarkers. And in wave 5, our collection of venous blood and microbiome samples expanded such biomarker availability even further. Outside of the core data sets of already available, our efforts over the years have also resulted in availability of other innovative data on our participants. I mentioned briefly just 3 examples here that will be discussed later in this session or in the workshop today. One is our collection of omics data, GWAS data, candidate gene data, and polygenic risk scores, which Brant Levitt will talk about in the session at 2:45 today. The AdHealth parent study data, which Kathy Harris and Joe Hutz have headed up, has added data again on some of the AdHealth parents in recent years as well for intergenerational research questions. And then the sexual orientation, gender identity, socioeconomic status, and health across the life course study, headed up by Carolyn T Halpern and Carolyn Conran, will soon be providing data on a subset of our participants focused on sexual orientation, gender identity, and health.
You have about 2 minutes left, Bob.
So AdHealth data are available through restricted use contract. Again, there will be a session today at 2:45 on this issue on obtaining contracts that Sydney Will and Tim Van Acker will be at, and through public use data at ICPSR at the University of Michigan. And then finally, for a sneak peek into Wave 6. Unfortunately, the context for Wave 6 health is not good. As American adults are moving into middle adulthood, there are major concerns about cardiometabolic health, cognitive and physical functioning, mental health, behavioral health, and high mortality rates. You've been reading the news lately or reading some science, we've all seen this. There's also in some cases, widening midlife health disparities. So the need for longitudinal multi-level data that I've been describing and earlier is perhaps larger than ever before. Our overall goal for Wave 6 is to collect and disseminate high quality data on the life course determinants and trajectories of health, health behavior, and health disparities among this cohort of individuals. Again, we're focusing a lot on disparities in health in midlife. And again, if you think about ages 40 to 49, on issues of work, family stress, caregiving, and discrimination. Down at the bottom of the slide below, we're also focusing a lot of time and energy on cognitive and physical functioning. That given the obesity levels in AdHealth, 43% obese in Wave 5, we think these issues will be major issues moving forward as the cohort ages into older adulthood. And my last thing, I'll mention in terms of the summary research plan, again, this is what we're doing in Wave 6. We're going to re-interview either through the web or in person as many of the original AdHealth cohort members as possible. We'll revisit as many of them possible for an in-home health exam, collecting blood, biomeasurements, height and weight, blood pressure, and so forth. We'll continue to collect mortality surveillance. We're going to continue to build contextual data files. We'll continue to conduct key assays using the biodata that we collect. And then we're going to clean, document, disseminate, archive, and provide user support for Wave 6 data for the scientific community. The data is for all of us. And we hope through workshops like this and through our efforts in the years to come, we'll build more and better data so that we can better understand midlife health and beyond in the United States. I'll skip some of the details there. We'll be doing this work over the next 5 years. We're in the design and planning phases right now, and we'll be collecting the data for Wave 6 in the next 3 years with dissemination scheduled for 2025. Thank you again for the funders for Wave 6, including National Institute on Aging and the other 5 co-funders listed here, for the many other additional co-funders over the years. And I'll stop here by providing the acknowledgement slide for all of the co-funders that have helped fund AdHealth over the years. Thank you very much, and I'll look forward to Q&A and to corresponding with folks after this. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Bob. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Kathleen Mullen-Harris. Dr. Harris served as the Director of AdHealth from 2004 through 2021 and is a PI of the AdHealth Parent Study. Dr. Harris is also at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Take it away, Kathy.
Great, thank you, Amelia. Let me bring up the let's see. Sorry about that. Okay. One more step. Okay, that should do it. Okay, great. Everybody can see my slides.
Looks good, Kathy.
Thanks, Amelia. All right, so as Bob said, I'm going to talk to you about the Wave 5 design and data. As you know, our goal was to re-interview the adult cohort members to collect social, environmental, behavioral, and biological data with which to track the emergence of chronic disease. And we also wanted to try to build on the life course history of respondents by adding and refining some early life measures of their birth and childhood. Bob mentioned these. We also attempted to collect birth records of respondents born in a subset of states. And when we bring all these data together with existing longitudinal data, we were going to create a 40-year life course record to test hypotheses about the developmental origins of health and disease. So we had several key design changes. As Bob said, the name was new. We were now the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent to Adult Health. We shifted from an in-person interview to a mixed mode interview using web, mail, phone, and in-person. We had to shorten the questionnaire length from 90 to 50 minutes, and we shifted from an intensive one-year data collection period to continuous interviewing over 3 years. And the biological data were collected in a separate home visit that followed up the mixed mode survey. And the other thing new is we had a venous blood draw. And finally, we sampled non-respondents. So the interview occurred between 2016 and 2018. And the respondents were aged 33 to 43. We collected the following data that I just mentioned, including the state of birth to obtain the birth records. We also wanted to identify all deaths for death surveillance. And then we conducted the fieldwork continuously on 3 nationally representative samples that I'll show you right here. Samples 1, 2, and 3, each selected to be nationally representative, and then collected more or less sequentially over the period 2016 to 2018. With sample 2, what we did was we actually split those into 2 subsamples, 2A and 2B, for purposes of administering in sample 2B an in-person interview, the way we had conducted all of our interviews in all prior waves. And the purpose of this was really to, try to estimate some of the mode effects for changing from in-person to a mixed mode. And that will be addressed actually in one of the sessions this afternoon. So these are our results. We end up with a sample size of 12,300. This is an effective response rate of 72%. It's an effective response rate because, as you recall, we sampled non-respondents. And we did a 66% biomarker consent rate. That gave us a sample of a little over 5,000. And this shows the distribution of the survey mode. Most everybody took it, most of our respondents took it on the web, a handful on paper. The in-person numbers, of course, represent sample 2B and another handful by phone. So these are the biomarker that we collected. There were repeat measures in our anthropometrics, our cardiovascular, and then we had whole blood assays of inflammation and immune function. We started with CRP, but we have since been able to add a number of inflammatory and immune markers that Eric Witzel will describe in the biomarker session this afternoon. Again, we collected our metabolic markers of lipids, hemoglobin A1C and glucose, and then new markers of renal function, creatinine and cystatin C, again, another medications inventory. And then at wave 5, as we collected venous blood, we were able to provide biospecimens for 2 ancillary studies for gene expression data and methylation data. So here's the data we've released. Basically, we've released just about all of the data. All of the survey data were released at the end of 2019. And that's why, for those of you who download the data, you see it's called a mixed mode survey data. That's all the data and the samples combined with sampling weights. We've released all of the biomarker data in 2020, and that does include biomarker weights, which you need to use because it's a smaller sample through which participants consented. And so there was a selection process there. The contextual data just recently released, and that includes the longitudinal measures, the traditional contextual data that we've released with every single wave that comes mainly from the census, rural urban commuting areas, some climate data and crime data. We also released some county level health and mobility data and ACA Medicaid expansion data at the state level. And finally, the public use data is pending release at ICPSR. We check every day. It's about to be available. And that represents the longitudinal N for the public use data. We had, as I mentioned, some vital events data, birth records. We've received to date vital records for 3 targeted states. And we're still sort of working on those data, but we will release the birth weight, gestational age, and some other characteristics probably at the end of this year. We also have a death surveillance project that you'll hear about in a session this afternoon. To date, we have identified 579 deaths since wave 1. We'll release gold standard sort of information on cause of death and circumstances of the death, hopefully later this year. The NDI cause of death has already been released, which we've released with every wave. And let me just mention the genomic data there at wave 4. We collected saliva and consented to archive that saliva for future studies. Those who consented were about almost 10,000, and these genome-wide association data are available on dbGaP. We have 2 sort of ongoing studies. We collected PAX gene samples at wave 5, and from those we were able to extract and profile gene expression. Again, methylation data is in the process of being profiled in terms of EWAS. From the venous blood at wave 5. Both of these samples are about 5,000, the same number as who participated in the biomarker collection. And a microbiome study is about to go into the field in the next couple months, so stay tuned on that one.
You have about 5 minutes left, Kathy.
Okay, so let me show you some illustrative wave 5 data. See if I can get through this. Here's some demographic data. It's about, half, these are weighted, half male, half female. The mean age is about 38. About 37% have a college education or more. A little over a quarter have never married, whereas, more than half have been married. And some, of course, are experiencing marital disillusion. This is the distribution of deaths in AdHealth from wave 1 to 2020. And you can see that it's what you would expect. I mean, 42% have died by accidental death, which is, especially common in the, adolescent and early adult years. 32% through natural. We've got 14% suicide, 10% homicide. Among the accidents, less than half are due to a motor vehicle accident, again, as expected, and about a third due to a drug overdose, which we have been increasingly reading about. And then among the natural causes, it's mainly cardiovascular disease and cancer. And there's some infectious disease outcomes there. So AdHealth, I wanted to mention, has really been a pioneer in the measurement of race and ethnicity. We were really unique in the sense that we continued to ask race and ethnicity across waves because we now know it changes. We also use a variety of modes to ask about it: self-reports, interviewer observations. We have ancestry from genomic data. And we've really always been innovating here. We asked multiple race options in the very first wave in 1994-95, which predated the first time that the census ever did it in 2000. We had a best race follow-up question to try to come to some mutually exclusive categories for race or Hispanic origin. And in all waves, except wave 5, we always, had to figure out race and ethnicity by combining a question on race and a question on Hispanic origin. But in wave 5, we followed the extensive research that the Census Bureau was doing that showed that a combined question that asked about race and Hispanic origin was, really much better in terms of less missingness. And so again, we thought we were going to predate the census of 2020, but then they, of course, abandoned that. But we went ahead and did it. Here's the question.
Minutes left, Kathy.
Okay, here's the question that asks about both race and ethnic origin. And this is just a quick distribution. You're not going to be able to absorb it all here, but our slides will be available where, we show the comparison, what happens. This is when these columns describe race and Hispanic origin using 2 questions. And then this is our new wave 5 question. And you can see that there's a lot of similarities. You do get a reduction in Hispanic origin that distributes across the other categories. Okay, another quick sort of cross-sectional perspective here. These are indicators of sort of drug abuse and illicit use by race, ethnicity, and education, trying to get at some of those disparate hypotheses. Again, this is wave 5, and what this shows is that individuals with more than a high school education, those in the blue bars, always have lower rates of opioid abuse, other prescription drug use, and illegal drug use than those with a high school education or less in the orange bars. And that's true across race, ethnicity, with the exception of the Hispanic young adults, where there is no difference or in the other direction. Okay, so just 2 more slides. Of course, the incredible value of AdHealth is its longitudinal data. And we have collected, outcomes across all the waves. As Bob mentioned, the AdHealth cohort really is the first young adult cohort to have lived its entire lives exposed to obesogenic environments. And so we've been tracking this over time. This shows, the pattern that shows where we are at wave 5. It increased from 11% to 22% to 37%, and then it starts to differ by sex, and we're up to about 47%. If you look at a growth curve of BMI, you'll see the same pattern that the rates are increasing. The rates are very rapid in adolescence and early adulthood, and they start to level off in the 30s. And the last slide, again, is now this is a model base that takes advantage of the fact that we collected data on depressive symptoms as measured by CESD across all of the waves. And here we're looking at what that pattern looks like depending on what the family context was in adolescence. And you can see this is for females, the pattern is the same basically for males, but among the females who experience a cohesive family, where family members cared about each other, did a lot of things together, they had fun together, they felt supportive by their family, have lower rates of, hey, what happened? Sorry, had lower rates of depressive symptoms at all, of course, all ages compared to those who came from a somewhat less cohesive environment in the pink. So let me stop there and I'll look forward to any questions that you have. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. Our next speaker is Dr. Joe Hutz, a PI of the AdHealth Parent Study at Duke University, and he will be talking about the AdHealth Parent Study, key features, and early findings. Joe, I don't think we can hear you.
Now can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, sorry. Let me acknowledge the funding from the National Institute on Aging on several grants, which have supported both the data collection and some follow-up work on the study, the AdHealth Parent Study. And the next slide shows you, let me sorry, there we go. The next slide just shows you Kathy Harris and I are the PIs of this study, but there were a number of co-PIs and staff members who in the past were involved in this, the design of the study especially, and in the execution of the actual field work. This study is really a data source. The Ad Health Parent Study is really a data source to study aging processes in 2 or more generations, and to study the intergenerational linkages in health, behaviors, and relationships. By itself, the Ad Health Parent Study is not a freestanding sample. While it is an older sample, as you're going to see in a few slides, it really is connected with the Ad Health Study, the data collected on the Ad Health respondents, which you've already seen 2 presentations about. Let me give you a few examples of sort of some research interests about these intergenerational linkages that motivated what we did, in particular, what we collected in the data. So there's a good deal of evidence that health conditions and health behaviors run in families. That's related to, we know that with respect to cardiovascular disease, obesity, and substance abuse of many forms. So the question here is whether parents' health statuses and trajectories can be used to predict the children's trajectories. A key feature of the Ad Health Study is understanding health trajectories, as Kathy's slide just a few minutes ago indicated. And we want to follow to sort of see the goal. One of the goals of the study was to understand, the parents' health statuses and the changes that they experience over time, which I'll show you a little bit about later on, might help predict those. The second area is really of a focus is what we call cognition, personality, and preferences. Here I focus on cognitive and non-cognitive ability. We know that cognitive ability is an important predictor of a range of different behaviors, as well as an important social issue as the age distribution shifts to older populations in the United States and other developed countries. The question here that we're interested in is, what's the extent of the intergenerational correlation between these cognitive and non-cognitive skills? Can we predict children's cognition and their cognitive changes over the life cycle as a function of what happened to their parents? Can we also help understand the parents' information, help us understand the similarities and dissimilarities in health and well-being outcomes across the generations? And a third area is two economic demographers on a body of important work, Ron Lee and Andy Foster, characterized at kind of the macro level, the different nations' transfers of resources between generations, especially public transfers, and their effects on the well-being of different societies. What we collected, one of the things we were interested in, and we collected data to try to get at this, is what's the extent of the transfer of resources between generations within families? Now, in essence, looking at the macro level where the unit is families. And what effects do these transfers have on the health and well-being of each generation? And the disparities, economic and health disparities, adversely affect families' capacities to provide the intergenerational safety nets, which we would like to think are going to be there, and yet we know are not in certain types of families. The data collection, I should have set up earlier. I have an expanded version of these slides, which we'll post. So there's things I can't go through in terms of detail. And this is one of the areas in which I'm not going to go through all the detail about how we actually, the construction of the sample. But it started with, as Bob Hummer's slides in the previous presentation indicated, the fact that the parents of the Ad Health respondents in the first wave one in 1995 were interviewed. Typically, the mother was interviewed. And they were asked some basic questions about the child, and I'll show you in a minute just some information about themselves and about their spouses. We refer to those parents as wave one parents, or W1P, you'll see it referred throughout. At wave one, those parents were in the range of 35 to 50. Here are the questions that were asked in that first wave. As I said, they were about themselves, about their children over on the right-hand side, in the middle about their spouse partners. A limited questionnaire to be sure, but nonetheless an important set of information. What the Ad Health Parent Study constructed a 20 plus follow-up study of a subsample of the wave one parents. The details are in the further slides about exactly how we selected that, but essentially we focused on primarily on parents who were either biological or adoptive parents or step parents. We did not focus on guardians, which were the case in some of the wave one households covered by Ad Health. And while we were there, we interviewing the parents in this sample, who now are in the range of 55 to 70, so older Americans. We also conducted an interview and asked much the same set of questions for the spouses or partners of the Wave 1 parents at the time of the survey. These parents, some of these parents were the parents of the AdHealth sample respondents, and we know that, but in many cases they weren't. This is a schema that shows you sort of the phase of the data, right? So the AdHealth parents are interviewed in Wave 1 and essentially corresponding to when Wave 5, we're off by a year in terms of the data collection. And this gives you, the schema here gives you some information about the characteristics of these parents. Basically, for the Wave 1 parents, right, we started with a target sample and ended up with 2,013 respondents, or about a completion rate of about 65%. This was a challenge because recall, these parents hadn't been interviewed or really contacted, with a few exceptions, for over 20 years. The replicates here just show you that we released part of the sample, the target sample, at different phases, and the second replicate was released only with 9 months left in the field period. So its completion rate is a good deal lower. Once we completed an interview for a parent, okay, we attempted to interview the spouse partner. As you can see here, we're about 78% completions on those. Rates for that sample of these parents. And this produced a parent-child pairs of about 2,250 pairs, which were really the focus of the analysis. Here's the data, and you can't read all of the data in the different domains, but what you can also see from this is that in many cases, we attempted to harmonize our data with existing data by using similar questions, adapting questions from other studies, AdHealth, and for sure, because we wanted that comparability across data, but also the HRS, NCHAP, PSIDs, and in some cases, we developed new measures. We benchmarked our data against two data sources, the HRS and Haynes. What you see by this graph, which shows you some different characteristics, is we're a little different on race and ethnicity, and that has to do with the sampling scheme, which is discussed in the longer slides. In the particular, why we have a larger number of non-Hispanic whites than the other samples. On general health and in health conditions, we come out fairly similar to what was found in these other data studies. Again, adjusting those other studies for the fact that you had to have a child in our sample to be able to get in the parent study sample. I'm not going to have time to go through much of this, but there are a bunch of different ways, and we have some discussion presentation slides about this, of how to use this data. One is longitudinal, to look at the parents themselves and from the two waves, Wave 1 and what amounts to coinciding with Wave 5. But you can also look at relationships contemporaneous between the two generations. We have this overlap at 2 points, in the schema sort of showed before. And one can look at intergenerational correlations, where you look at the status or outcomes of family members, parents and their children at the same point in their respective life cycles. I'll leave the last one to this is the longitudinal part, showing just what changed over time. And this slide here shows you that, as you would expect, on the left, self-reported health decline from Wave 1 to essentially Wave 5 for the parents. You see in the other slides that some of the behaviors with respect to alcohol consumption actually varied in terms of what happened relative to before and after, and smoking actually did decline. I mean, this was partly a function of societal changes with respect to smoking. There's other comparisons one can do. This next comparison is really showing you the comparison between parents and their children at roughly comparable ages and same ages in their lifetimes. And this is an interesting one. Let me start on the left. Let me start on the right. The educational attainment is not a surprise, right? Educational progression has occurred in the United States, and that's certainly reflected in the data. But if you look at the right-hand side with self-reported health, same measures, or roughly the same measures in the two cases, actually the health has declined. We knew this societally, that as Bob's talk sort of indicated, we know this is true, but here with this data, you can actually look at the parents themselves and associate this with other behavior. Then the last part of this presentation is really about a study that Kathy and I, with collaborators, recently completed, and is forthcoming or in press for at the American Journal of Preventive Medicine, and it explores something we did in the study, which was to collect a family health history from the parents about their parents and their grandparents and their other relatives, to look at chronic diseases. Family health histories are a source often used in the practice of medicine for collecting information to predict, and they're used for purposes of help predicting risks, risks of different types of diseases and conditions across from one generation to the next. Most of those studies focus on collecting information on first-degree relatives, your mother, your father. And most of the studies which have done focus on particular conditions, seldom looking at multiple ones. And similarly, in the first degree, there's typically not a lot of information about generations past the first, maybe one's grandparents. The study here, because we asked the questions of the parent, is now going to allow us to look at the health conditions and the relationships with them for actually 4 generations. And that's illustrated here.
1 minute left, Joe.
Thanks. I'm just about done. The 4 generations are the AdHealth respondents at the bottom, G4, the parents, their mothers in the AdHealth parent study. Then the questions that were asked of the mother about the biological grandparent of the AdHealth sample members and the biological great-grandparents of the AdHealth sample members. I don't have time to show you all the graphs, but here's what we find. Predictably, sort of not surprisingly, the health of the first generation was most predictive for many chronic conditions, cholesterol levels, or high cholesterol, obesity, et cetera. But there were some health conditions where the incidence of these conditions for other generations mattered in terms of the predicting the condition for the AdHealth sample members. Secondly, and throughout all, even if the individual predictions, individual generational incidence of conditions and diseases weren't significant, they were all jointly significant. So the conditions of older generations matter, not just the immediate older generation, the first degree generation. One exception to this, which is one that we're going to be further exploring, was the characteristics of the incidence of hypertension among older generations was simply not predictive of the G4 generation, the AdHealth sample members. And that's a puzzle to us, and one which may be related to more about timing than, because one of the issues is when did hypertension, early onset is really the concern from a health condition or a special condition, and that we didn't collect data on. An example of when you forget to, or when you don't get everything you'd hope to, as you typically find out at the end of the study, and we've done it here. Bob has already sort of told you about the data, how to get a hold of the data. The data is available both in the under restricted use contracts, and the public version of this data is available through ICPSR and Dataverse. And Kathy and I would be happy if you want to follow up with discussion more about the study. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Joe. And our last speaker, but not least, is Dr. Carolyn T Halpern. She's the Director of Sexual Orientation, Gender Identity, Socioeconomic Status and Health across the Life Course Study, the AdHealth SOGI SES, and also at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And she'll be talking about the AdHealth SOGI SES key features.
Joe, if you could stop sharing your screen.
Sorry, yep.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here to talk to you about this.
Carolyn, we can see your notes.
Oh.
Your note mode.
Alrighty. How's that?
It's the same.
You're kidding. We practiced this for many times. Did that change it?
I don't think so.
Oh, sorry. All right, let me go into the PowerPoint. How's that?
I don't believe you're sharing.
Oh, okay. Let me. Okay, now what are you seeing?
We see the notes. I think if you go to the top left, Tim is probably the best person to.
Yeah,
publish
sorry.
it. But you can start from the beginning. If you hit from the beginning, that looks perfect.
Okay, great. Sorry, apologies for the slow start. I'm happy to be here to talk about the SOGI-SES study. I'm one of the PIs of the study. SOGI-SES is an ad health ancillary study, which means it's funded by an R01, separate R01 that's supported by NICHD and NIMHD. And my co-PI is Carolyn Conran, who is the research director at the Williams Institute at the UCLA School of Law. I also want to acknowledge some other key personnel. Kathy Harris is a co-investigator on the project. Dana Burchell is our project manager. Yixing Chu is our programmer analyst, and RTI, as with all the other Ad Health Waves, is a subcontractor for our field work. And I've listed some of the key RTI team members there. So the overall goal of this project is to try to identify socioeconomic contributors to the well-documented health disparities among sexual and gender minorities. We know that socioeconomic factors are fundamental contributors to health across the life course, and we see inadequate resources as chronic stressors that could impact health. However, SES is relatively understudied for this population. So Ad Health was really uniquely suited to address the issues related to the health of sexual and gender minorities. There are more than 3,000 respondents who fit a wide definition of sexual and gender minorities or are gender nonconforming. And these folks were not selected into the sample on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. They're there because it's a population-based sample. So they're diverse in terms of race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic indicators. And we have the luxury of 20 years, more than 20 years of prospectively collected data. So the overall study aims for the project, one is to develop a new survey module that would capture retrospective information about sexual and gender minority developmental processes, and to do a deeper dive on SES information that's particularly relevant to this population. So we have conducted an ancillary web survey with all Ad Health sexual and gender minorities and a comparison sample of cisgender heterosexuals. The third aim is to clean, document, and prepare the data for dissemination to Ad Health users. And then within our project, we have one aim of conducting analyses to understand how these stressors contribute to mental health disparities for sexual and gender minorities. So I won't walk through all of this, but basically this is the conceptual model for the project, where we're looking at how sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression play out in linkages with parent and child relationship quality, minority stress processes, and discrimination processes. And we intend to look at the sort of economic mediators that ultimately contribute to stress and potentially depressive symptoms. For our sampling, everyone who participated in wave 5 and had a wave 1 sampling weight was eligible for this OGSES study. So more than 11,000 people. We decided to define SGM very broadly and inclusively, and to try to do a census of all those respondents in the AdHealth sample. So our goal was more than 3,000 respondents. And our definitions for inclusion were anyone who identified as not 100% heterosexual at wave 3, 4, or 5, discordant sex assigned at birth and gender identity at wave 5, discordant sex assigned at birth and gender expression at wave 5, and having had a same-sex partner either ever or in the past 12 months across waves 3, 4, and 5. So the remaining folks of the 11,000 plus were eligible to be in the heterosexual cisgender comparison group. Our goal was to get 1,500 people. We ended up dividing that sample into 16 different strata based on sex assigned at birth, race, ethnicity, and poverty, and then selected from within those strata. So the general field protocol, our measures were selected based on constructs from minority stress theory. We did cognitive interviewing to try to assess survey usability. It was a completely web-based survey. We were shooting for 30 to 45 minutes in length. We did not collect biomarkers, paid $50 incentive for survey completion. We had the amazing fortune of trying to field our survey in the middle of COVID. So we launched in September 2020 and wrapped up the survey site in February 2021. So our final sample is 22,614 respondents. Our raw response rate was 56%, which I think will shift a little bit once we take other factors into consideration. So this gives you a sense of some of the illustrative measures. We're trying to get at developmental processes. So for example, the timing of gender identity milestones, gender expression, childhood gender nonconformity, multiple economic indicators, intergenerational transfers, employment, assets, debts, and particularly we're interested in reproductive technology and adoption costs, which is a very salient cost for this population. Multiple indicators of mental health, and then a variety of measures of different kinds of stressors, so stressful life events, discrimination, both in employment, education, housing, and then minority stressors that would be more specific to this population. And then finally, family formation and household composition and physical health, which is measured by reports of diagnosed health conditions. And we did end up adding some questions about COVID-19.
We have about 5 minutes left, Carolyn.
Okay, thank you. So here's where we are now. The survey data collection is complete. We have 1,898 sexual and gender minority respondents and 716 cisgender heterosexuals. We are in the middle of cleaning the data and developing documentation for dissemination. Our statisticians at RTI are also in the process of assessing response bias for the sample, calculating our final survey response rate, and also developing sampling weights for the sample. So our goal is to have the data cleaned and released to AdHealth users in 2022. And I'll show you just a few very preliminary unweighted numbers about what the sample looks like. So it's 3/4 female. Almost half the sample are persons of color. 3/4 are sexual and gender minorities, and almost 50% of the sample did not complete college. So there's some diversity there, which we were pleased to see the people of color statistic, because it was challenging to try to get a diverse sample into the group. And then when the data are released, they will be available through the AdHealth data portal as is the case with the other ad health data sets that are available. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you